Talking all things SEC and college football with a familiar face, a friend of the airwaves, and someone I'm very happy to have back on here with me, Marc Ryan. He's a host at 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit, also does a national show, which I'm going to let him expand on because, Marc, you're all over the place, my friend. I'll be honest with you. It's hard to keep up because you're doing so much. But, again, the constant is you're doing a fantastic job, man. Happy to see you having success. And great to have you on once again, man. Like I said, to talk SEC. We might talk some Big Ten. You're up there in Big Ten country in Detroit, but obviously a Florida Gator alum, so you've got deep roots here in the Southeastern Conference. Marc, what's going on, man? Again, appreciate you taking the time as always.
Can I get an amen? Fantastic to be here with you again, my friend. SEC Unfiltered. I'm proud of your success. It is great to be with you guys. Awesome to be with you guys. And it's been a super fun and exciting college football season. You know, Chris, my national show on the Infinity Sports Network, formerly CBS Sports Radio. We're on 360 channels nationwide. We're on Sirius XM channel 158. And we're on every Saturday, 5 to 10 p.m. Eastern time while all the games are going on. So it kind of evolves into a bit of a scoreboard live update show where we're bouncing around the country. There was one show where I was really critical of the Gamecocks. I know that's a shock to you. But there was one show where that was going on, and it was on in Columbia. And people were livid saying, how could this guy be on in Columbia? It was after they lost the LSU game. You know, and people were going nuts. How is this guy on our station in Columbia? Hi, I'm Marc Ryan. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Great to be here. But boy, have the tides turned. And how has Shane Beamer has those boys playing really hard and really impassioned football right now?
Yeah, Marc, I wanted to make sure, again, we highlighted your national show because I'm sure there's lots of folks tuned in, whoever you're a fan of in the SEC, that they may not even realize they've heard you on their airwaves before and they didn't know necessarily who it was. They had heard the name Marc Ryan. Well, this is it. This is him. So if you heard him on the radio, again, all across the Southeast, which you probably have because, again, you're on basically the biggest national show that you can find with Infinity Sports Network. Again, and Sirius XM too, right? Channel 158, correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on the Odyssey app, as well, AUDACY on the Odyssey app, man. Thanks for the mention there. But that's a lot of fun, and it's an incredible honor to be on during when all these games are shaking out. I mean, the show begins at halftime of the 3:30 games. Okay, now think about this. You know, so you have the 12 o'clock games to react to. The 3:30 games are at halftime. You're previewing the evening games, and then you're on for the first half of the evening game, 5 to 10 p.m. It's a great time. I wouldn't have it any other way. But dude, congratulations, SEC Unfiltered. It's popping up in my mentions everywhere. Every time I see SEC Unfiltered, I think I'm going to be seeing Philly, and I'm almost never am. And I'm like, who are all these strangers that Chris Phillips has been wise to employ? But it's been a great thing, man. I can't tell you the number of times I've used something that I've seen that you've put out.
I appreciate that, Marc. It's a lot of love, man. Let's start. You mentioned Shane Beamer, South Carolina. Again, you worked in Greenville, South Carolina at the Fan Upstate for a few years, so very familiar with the Gamecocks. Just overall thoughts, Marc, on their season to this point. You mentioned, there's been some disappointments. Hey, it's like any other South Carolina season. There's been some highs. There's been some lows. There's been some in-betweens. The offensive line's still a problem, Marc. You and I used to talk about that. The offense is still giving them issues, but the defense has taken such a huge step forward from last year to this year. Gamecocks find themselves with a winning record going into a final pivotal month of the season, opportunity to get to bowl eligibility and maybe more. We talked about how pivotal this year was for Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks. Just thoughts on the job they've done to this point and what lies ahead. It really feels like this final month is going to define how we look back on year 4 of the Beamer era.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You and I, earlier this calendar year, defined success for the Gamecocks as 7-5. As you know, we don't stray from that. Okay, that is the mark of success. So this month is going to tell all because this is now year 4 for Shane Beamer. So let's say a true statement right now. Okay, not to take the wind out of the sails, but it's a true statement. In year 4 for Shane Beamer, the Gamecocks have not been in the top 25 at all the entire year. Okay, if that's good enough for you, you might have the right head coach. If that isn't good enough for you, you might need a different one. Or you might not, because they've been playing very, very impassioned football the last few weeks, and you're starting to see the results. You're starting to see a ferocious defensive line with unbelievable special teams and improved quarterback play with a running game. And so, good defensive line, good special teams, you can win a lot of games with that formula. And, you're starting to see for the first time what an identity of a Shane Beamer team can look like. But why did it take 4 years to develop an identity? And is the identity going to be enough? So, Chris, I'll turn that back on you. Year 4. At no point during the season have you been in the top 25. If it remains that way at the end of the season, is that good enough? Year 4, no appearances in the top 25 at all.
I think most of the fan base will say it's not good enough, however, Mark, I would say that I think the fan base has more so – they're not attaching success or failure of year 4 to the ranking. They're attaching it more so to, did you make a bowl game or not, per se.
Oh, come on.
I think, listen.
Nobody cares about bowl games anymore.
Well, here's what I was going to say, Mark.
Attaching it to, did you beat Clemson?
Right,
because
right. Fair enough.
You have a team right now where a win is possible over Clemson, and I think that's going to be the final taste in your mouth. The Belk Bowl shouldn't save anybody. You know what I mean? That shouldn't save anybody. Now, I mean, I'm so confused by this, Chris, because like all year long with Florida as well, it's like get to 6 wins. Why? For a Music City Bowl that half the players aren't going to play in anyway? Like, why? Can you answer this question for me? Why is the mantra to get to a bowl game that's not going to matter to half the roster?
I think, Mark, and I'll focus on South Carolina first, because I think you have a really interesting point with Florida. But I think for South Carolina, here's the funny thing. I don't know that there's really even a difference between 6 or 7 wins, let's say, this year. Like, we're really splitting hairs because it's all lining up, Mark, for year 5 to be the make or break year for the Shane Beamer era in Columbia. I mean, I just, like, even if they anywhere between 5 and I'm not saying I think 5 and 7 should get Shane Beamer fired, especially at this point when you've already won 4 games. I mean, this team should be a lock to get to a bowl game at minimum. But I even said this before the season, Mark. It's all lining up to where year 5 is the make or break year. Now, does Shane Beamer have more goodwill than he probably deserves with the fan base? Probably so. I think, and you know this, Mark, as well as I do, that I think that fan base, that the core of that fan base, they look at Shane Beamer as a reflection of them. He's a diehard like me. They gravitate towards the emotions that he presents, which, by the way, I'll give Beamer credit. He's been better about that this year in regards to not having these crazy outbursts or saying outlandish things.
I wouldn't know anything about that. I wouldn't.
Yeah. He's been better about it. And I don't know if it's because, a couple of he's under less stress because folks like Marc Ryan and Chris Phillips are no longer actually applying pressure to what he's doing on a week in, week out basis. But, I think it's always kind of lined up. Hey, year 4, as long as the wheels don't completely fall off, it's pointing to year 5 as the make or break year anyways. Now in Gainesville, to your point, it is interesting because going into this season, everybody used the schedule as the crutch and get to 6 and 6. If Billy makes a bowl game, he's back in Gainesville. I was talking with some other folks, Mark, and I want to get your perspective on this shift into Florida. Florida right now, there's a path. You look at it like, hey, Billy's just kind of treading water, staying alive. Is Florida getting hot? And let's say finishing 6 and 6 or God forbid 7 and 5. Is that the worst thing that could happen to Florida football long term? Is it better if it just blows up?
I want to address one thing you said about South Carolina first. I understand what you're saying about the fans being emotionally tied to Beamer. That exists here in Detroit to a degree as well. Jared Goff, the Lions quarterback, is not the best QB in the NFL. But I'll tell you, Chris, they would start a war here if they traded Jared Goff for Patrick Mahomes. He is their guy, okay? And Jared Goff chose them. There haven't been a lot of players that have chosen the Lions. Shane Beamer chose the Gamecocks. There haven't been a lot of coaches that, I'm a Gamecock through and through. I'm going to be here no matter what. I'm one of you. I'm proud to be here. Goff and Beamer are cut from the same cloth, and these people will fight for the death for you with that being the case. Now, Billy Napier, there's more to it that you didn't address in that open thing, and that's okay. But I think you consider DJ Lagway as well. Okay, so you look at the rest of the year. There is zero consideration to bringing him back from anybody if he doesn't get to 6 wins. Again, why, when the bowl game you're going to play in, half the roster isn't going to play in anyway? You know, why are you trying to get to something that the roster doesn't care about? But if you do get to 6 wins, it would mean you have another big win on the schedule. There is no scenario where Billy Napier returns if he loses to Florida State. Zero. But if he does win one of these games, you have LSU at home, you have Ole Miss at home, right? If, Texas is not a winnable game, Georgia's not a winnable game. Incidentally, Florida's number 17 in the Josh Pate poll this week too, which is awesome, which means favorability on a neutral field, right? So the problem is you're playing number 4 and number 8 and number 10 and number 11 or whatever, number 1 or 2. That's the problem. I think if they can win one of those 2 games, Ole Miss and LSU, beat Florida State, get to 6-6, the combination of the wheels not falling off on the year when it looked like they were, and then wanting to have a future with DJ Lagway, I think would get him another year. I honestly do.
I think so as well. I think he'll be back if they get a bowl game.
It's crazy to think that when you factor in where we were a month ago on this discussion,
I mean, I was at that Miami game, man. I mean, I saw it firsthand.
I'm sorry.
I felt the the disdain from Gator fans. But I agree with you to your point. I think you mentioned DJ Lagway as well. I think that, people wanting to, hey, let's see. And I would like to honestly, selfishly see it as well. What does, DJ Lagway is Billy Napier's guy who he recruited, what can he do with him? And I mean, I think obviously next year, the schedule be damned. Because it's going to be the same schedule but flip, but schedule be damned. It's going to be, what would you say, probably 8-win minimum?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 8 wins minimum because you don't have the schedule excuse as a backdrop there. But can I just say, I'm really angered, Chris. You and I were talking about the direction of college football off the air and how I'm disenchanted with some of it. How about the negative precedent we're setting on a couple of things? Number one, the Texas-Georgia overturn shows that you will bow to the whim of fans if fans get upset. Well, oh my gosh, if the fans are going to go nuts, we're going to call the game differently. Think about what you're doing there. And then Cam Ward in Miami, we do realize, no one likes to hold him accountable for this, but he committed to Miami. He didn't like the NIL money that was coming through, so then he says, I'm declaring for the draft. Then the NIL money that he demanded didn't come through. He comes back. He holds the entire program of Miami hostage, and now he looks ripe for doing so. And they're winning all these BS games, Cal and Virginia Tech on total, blessings from above. They're winning all these games, and it's just like, is this really what's right for a guy that held the whole program hostage? And, oh, you're not going to meet my price? Okay, I'm going to the NFL. Oh, no, you are going to beat my price. Okay, I'll play for you for 1 year. Is that really what we want college football to be? I got my Nick Saban hat on now, man.
I'm glad, Mark, you brought that up because I wanted to segue into that because something I've been wanting to ask you, I think, for a while as this season has progressed, because you and I have talked many times on the airwaves, off the airwaves about college football and, with the ever-changing landscape, with conference realignment, with NIL, with portal. Let's face it, for a lot of people, a lot of fans, a lot of media who maybe won't voice it or aren't brave enough, it's made college football less likable. For some, it's made it unlikable. You mentioned disenchanted with it. I want to get your thoughts, though, because, again, you've been very vocal about how you feel about college football. I feel like, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you like it less. You hate, it's disgusting. I think you've used that word, disgusting, some of the things that are going on with NIL portal. The only reason I push back, Mark, is because this is the best season of college football we've had since 2007. Like, it's crazy. We thought the rich were going to get richer, Mark. Mark, I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. For the common fan, which is, I think, the hat you wear in a lot of these conversations, which is fine, the game's never been worse. But for the business of college football, for content folks like myself, and even for you to a degree, can I argue, Mark, that NIL, portal, all this stuff, while it's annoying in the offseason, it's actually made the game better when you look at what's happening on the field?
Well, I disagree. Chris, I still love it. So I don't know if liking it less. I just think you're upset because you love something and you're seeing what's happening to it, right? Chris, Georgia, Texas, Oregon, or Ohio State are going to win the national championship. Those are the only 4 teams that can. And those are the only 4 teams that are buying their roster to the degree that they are. Okay? Now, what's the problem, you say? Baseball doesn't have a salary cap. Yeah, in baseball, you had a 5 seed and a 6 seed make the World Series last year. Only 6 seeds make it in the AL and the NL. 8 wild cards have won. The worst team most seasons wins 40% of the time. The best team wins 60% of the time. Baseball is you put every team in a blender and you see which one it spits out. It's so random. This isn't that. You can buy your way to a national championship. So in the end, when you're talking about how crazy this is, Chris, just remember that your boy here, Marc Ryan, told you that Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Ohio State are going to be the teams that are there in the end. Okay? And the fact that I can tell you that in the month of October doesn't mean you have this fun and crazy season. You know, it's you're buying your championship. And to me, I don't enjoy that as a fan, buying a championship.
So you don't think this season has been one of the better ones in recent memory? Because to your point, even before NIL and portal, I could have said that there's only 3 or 4 teams. I mean, that's been the truth forever, I feel like. There's only, going into each season, there's at most 5 to 6. And I think that's a stretch that can win the national title. But it's for the rest of college football, Mark. Like, Vanderbilt beat Alabama. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, but that's
like,
not, Vanderbilt didn't have NIL then. They don't have NIL now. You know?
I know, but I'm saying, like, portal-wise, like, they're able to go out and get a guy like Diego Pavia that can come in and, like, completely – I mean, Vandy's in the top 25. I mean, they're able to flip their roster.
Vandy
I don't
in the
disagree.
top 25 in year 3. Shane Beamer not in the top 25 in year 4. Okay?
Oh,
I mean,
man.
Think about that. So,
hey, listen, to your point, Mark, just really quickly on a side note, yeah, if South Carolina loses to Vanderbilt, we might be having even if as good as Vandy is, there are unforgivable sins at every school in Columbia. Losing to Vanderbilt is the unforgivable sin that can get you fired.
The greatest story that I've seen in college football this year. And I find myself gravitating to this level of football, right? It's not that I don't still love it, Chris. It's that I love it, but I'm pained, right? Mm-hmm. I think the Army-Navy story is fascinating. Mm. And you look at a development this weekend, okay? Boise State is at UNLV. Mm. They're favored by 3.5 points. UNLV beat Oregon State last week. You know, I know they're technically still the Pac-12, but Oregon State essentially 1 year removed from the Pac-12. UNLV won at Oregon State. UNLV wins that game. Who's next in line for the playoff berth? You know who it is? Army and Navy. They're the next 2 teams in the rankings. Mm. Navy gets Notre Dame this weekend. They're a 13-point underdog. Have you any idea how big of a Navy fan I'm going to be in this game? It's the first time it's the latest in the season that these 2 teams have been unbeaten since 1945. Mm-hmm. Okay, 69 years. That's Rob Gronkowski's favorite number. 69 years since they've been unbeaten this late in the season. That, to me, Chris, is why you watch. Because if I'm going to have to deal with the expanded playoff, which adds a safety net to games like Georgia and Texas, which makes them less exciting because they have a safety net. Michigan, Ohio State, safety net every single year now. You can meet 3 times. You know, scarcity increases demand. Now you're getting rid of all that demand. Then I'm going to gravitate towards the special stories where an Army and a Navy could actually make a playoff for the first time ever. You know, and I'm going to wrap my arms around that.
My pushback, Mark, and maybe, again, I'm selfishly coming at it from this perspective, but my pushback would be, you know, I was at Third Saturday in October. I was at Alabama, Georgia, safety net game. Mark, that was one of the best games of my lifetime. And that was one of the most exhilarating games of my life. Like, so, like, I don't think the expanded playoff is, like, the games don't matter. to who, Mark? Because, like, when I'm there, that's the I mean,
I hear you.
that's the biggest deal. Again, maybe I'm speaking from like a slanted perspective because my business is SEC Unfiltered, but like when I'm in these stadiums, I'm not sitting there like, well, you know, Bama and Georgia both know there's a safety net, so they don't really care if they win or lose. The intensity's insane. It's insane still.
I hear you. I hear you. However, here's why. You are able to practice mindfulness, which is putting yourself in the moment and disregarding everything else. I don't have that skill. Okay. So the whole time I'm watching that, it's like, yeah, that was an amazing play by Ryan Williams, but like used to be that the loser is out, you know, or the loser is as close to out as possible. You know, last year, Alabama beats Georgia, gives them their first loss of the year in the SEC championship game. Georgia is out, right? So the fact that it's like you win, you get the 1 seed, we lose, we get the 5 seed. I'm not able to detach from that in the moment as well as you are.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You mentioned, Mark, I want to get to something you said. So sticking with the SEC, how many teams in the SEC can realistically win the national championship this season? You mentioned Georgia and Texas. Is that the only two that you think can win the national title from the SEC? Is there anybody else you look at right now that has a shot?
No.
Not even LSU. Not an LSU.
No. Lay off the drugs, kids. Really. You know, come on, man. LSU?
Does Bama, if they get it rolling, have the talent?
No, right. they don't. It's not even close. And the reason is that Phil Knight and Nike bought Oregon, and Ryan Day openly discusses his $21 million roster. You know, and now when we're talking about Southern Cal perhaps trying to be good again next year, Lincoln Riley's right on the cusp. Is he really? Maryland, Minnesota, really? You know, how about the Pac-12 teams having a difficulty, a challenge with the physicality of the Big Ten? The week after week, you know, that's what you saw when like Utah joined the Pac-12. It wasn't that they couldn't beat a USC in one game. It was like the next week when their asses were kicked. That's when they're losing to like Cal and Stanford and those kind of teams, right? USC is getting their asses handed to them by the Big Ten physically. They're bloodied and battered, and then that results in them losing to the Minnesotas and the Marylands of the world, right? So that's the issue going on there. But Ohio State and Oregon are buying their roster, and there isn't a team in the SEC that is ready that has the team and the seniority and the upperclassmen at that level to knock off an Ohio State or an Oregon. So, no, it's Georgia and Texas as the hope for the SEC, and that's it.
To your point, Mark, your reaction when you see stories that Ohio State spent, what, $20 million on its roster? Your just initial reactions when you see those stories come across your feed.
So, Chris, look, obviously I'm not a fan of Ohio State and their $21 million roster. We can't get to the point where we have a salary cap in college football, employees in college football, tying players to rosters for 2 or 3 years fast enough. We keep hearing that's eventually what it's going to be, but when is that going to happen, right? Why do we still, if everyone knows how it's going to be, why isn't it taking place? Why isn't it happening? Why are we stuck in this yesteryear? And it's amazing how I'm never hearing about the student athlete anymore. Oh, we can't do it to the student athlete. It's amazing how that just dissipates when they're being paid. You know, the thing, my biggest pet peeve is when people selectively use the words kids or adults when it benefits them. Oh, you're going to do that to a kid. You're going to demand he plays in a bowl game to a kid who has a lot of money. Oh, they should be making money. They're legal adults. They should. You see what I mean? Like it's totally playing both sides of the fence. It's Switzerland, man.
Marc Ryan, 97.1 the ticket. Mark, it's always a pleasure when you jump on. Last thing, I'll get you out of here. You mentioned Army, Navy. That's probably your favorite story of the 2024 college football season. If I had to narrow the focus to the SEC, has there been anything that's jumped out to you that even in the midst of the craziness with the NIL portal realignment, has there been anything that's jumped out to you as a feel-good story in the SEC you enjoyed following this year?
Yeah, how about Vanderbilt being the best team in the Music City State? How about Vanderbilt singing Rocky Top? You know, I mean, how about that? You know, Nico, I have no idea how to say ya. Versus Vanderbilt is going to be a hell of a game, and I love what Clark Lee is doing, and Clark Lee is making it very difficult, not just for guys like Beamer, but also for guys like Napier, because if he can do it, what are you doing? If he can do that with Pavia, what is Michigan's excuse for their joke of a quarterback situation? Michigan doesn't have anybody that can complete a forward pass. Chris, that's not an exaggeration. Michigan is 131st in the country out of 133 teams in explosive plays. Okay? Their grenade has no powder inside. You know what I'm saying? It's incredible that they find, and Sharon Moore's responsible for that. He looked at that quarterback room and he said, "No, we're good. We're good. We don't need Pavia. We don't need Cam Ward. We're fine here at Michigan." That's the difference between them being in the playoff and them being a total afterthought. And by the way, Michigan State very well could pull the upset this weekend. Very well could. It would be the 11th time in the last 17 years. You tell me who runs that rivalry. You tell me.
They don't want to hear it, Mark. They don't want to hear it. Again, host at 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit. Nationally, you can hear him on Infinity Sports Network, Sirius XM Channel 158, on social media at Marc Ryan on air. Mark, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Let's definitely do this again soon.
I got to tell you this, man. I forgot how fun this is to do with you. This is one of the dynamic that we have on a show, I think is so incredibly fun. And I love how you let me on this show have the role of villain. I love that. I love dude, sports needs villains, and I'll gladly volunteer. I love you guys. Be well.
Mark, appreciate you, man.
Thank you.